Salt and tar first, then the taste of copper, sucked and sharp. My eyes wouldn't focus. The world came in smears of red silk and torchlight, a roar of voices pressing down from every side, wood under my knees, rope on my wrists. Somewhere a brass bell kept ringing, and every ring drove a spike behind my eyes. I blinked. The smear became a square, a market square, packed shoulder to shoulder, faces turned up at me like a field of pale coins. I was on a platform, above the crowd, and across my sight, faint as breath on glass, words I had no business reading floated over half the things in front of me. Over a man's iron collar, lapsed. Over the archway behind the stage, permit expired. Over the bell itself, a hand cracked across the back of my skull. Up! On your feet, dog. A big man in a green coat hauled me standing by the rope. The auctioneer. He stank of wine and chalk, and he spun me toward the crowd like he was showing off a side of beef. "Look at it weep," he boomed. "Fresh off the boats. Strong back, all its teeth." He pried my jaw open with 2 fingers. I bit down, tasted chalk. He laughed, not even angry. "Spirit, too. Some of you like that." I tried to talk. What came out was a stranger's voice, lower than mine, scraped raw. "I'm not." My forehead was wet. Something trickled past my eyebrow, warm and slow. I smelled the iron of it. Ink, not blood. I reached up. He slapped my hand flat back down. "Don't touch the seal." His grin slipped, just for a beat. Then he pointed at my brow, loud, performing it for them. "You see this, good people? You see the red? This one's already stamped. Condemned by the court itself. Sold cheap. Sold as is. Sold for whatever work is left in it before the date comes due." The crowd murmured. Purses shifted. And there it hung, across my own face, in that same thin, floating script that sat on everything else. Condemned. Below it, a date, and the date would not resolve. It guttered, smeared, like a permit somebody had stamped before the ink was mixed. 30 years I'd spent reading dates like that off other men's walls. "What's it do?" someone shouted from the floor. "Whatever you tell it," the auctioneer called back. "For as long as it lasts." I got 1 foot under me. I dragged the stranger's lungs full to tell them I was a man, a person, an inspector, that my whole life I had been the one who held the stamp, not the one who wore it, and the bell rang over me 3 times and drowned every word in my throat. A clerk at the platform's edge unrolled a strip of parchment, never once looked up at me, read off a name that wasn't mine and a number that was. "Lots spoken for." The auctioneer sounded almost bored now. "Bought before the bell. House of Vel." He didn't ask the floor. He didn't take a bid. A gavel came down on the rail beside my knee. 1 hard crack of dark wood on dark wood, and somewhere a ledger took my weight, my teeth, the wet red verdict on my head, and wrote it all down as goods received. Sold. Before I'd drawn 10 breaths in this body, before I'd learned the city's name, sold, condemned, stamped, with my own trade hanging dead in my roped-up hands. The script didn't stop at my face, it bled outward. While the gavel still rang in the rail, that thin floating ink crawled off my brow and out across the square, and everywhere it touched, it left a word. A boy lugging water, iron at his throat, lapsed. The shackle on the woman roped beside me. Void. Behind her, a fat merchant's oath collar, gilded and proud. Expired, in letters only I could read. I knew that handwriting. 30 years I'd read it off other men's walls. A hand closed on my rope. Not the auctioneer. A lean man in vel gray, brass tag at his collar, a folded chain hooked over one arm. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the parchment in his fist. "Up, walk." He yanked. I stumbled down the platform steps into the press of bodies. The crowd was covered in it. Every collar I passed wore a date gone soft at the edges. Every seal sat past its term. The brass bell above the stage. Permit expired. The archway, the same. The customs house across the square. 4 stories of white stone with the Codex sun carved over the door. Expired. The whole face of it, top to gutter. My feet kept moving because the chain made them. My eyes did the rest. I started counting. Couldn't help it. It's what the trade does to you. You walk into a building and your gut tallies every fault before your mouth says hello. Collar, seal, shackle, tower. The number climbed in the corner of my sight, faint and certain, the way a bad inspection adds up before you've cleared the first floor. It settled at 4,712, across the whole capital. Every flagged permit, counted and held. A first reading tally hanging over a city that had no idea it was being read. The bellman tugged hard. Move, dog! I moved. But I was grinning now, lips split and copper on my teeth, and that put more fear in his eyes than the spit had put in the auctioneer's. Because I'd seen it. The collars, the bell, the customs house, the man dragging me by the wrist. Every last seal in this place was past its date. Same smeared, mixed too early ink they'd pressed onto my own forehead. This wasn't an empire. It was a stack of overdue paperwork nobody had the nerve to call in. Calling it in was the only thing I'd ever been good at. Quit grinning. The words came low at my left ear. They drown men for less than that smile. A woman shared my line, roped wrist to wrist, marching half a step behind me through the press, where the bellman's chain dragged us both. Ink, the color of old bruises, ran up her forearm, a brand, neat and official, and across it that floating word only I could read, void. She kept her eyes on the cobbles. You're reading something. I watched your face climb that customs house. You can tell. I'm a scribe. A dry breath. Was. I read the codex for a living, before they wrote me into it. The handler hauled us around a fishmonger's barrow. Brine and crushed ice, the wet slap of baskets. I dropped my voice under the racket. That tower. I jerked my chin at the white stone rising over the square. Tell me about it. Imperial seat of weights, untouchable. Its permit lapsed. Her step caught, a hitch, then smooth again. Say that again. The seal over the door. Past its term. Nobody renewed it. I watched the word hang there, expired. Top to gutter. Back home, I'd have padlocked those doors by noon. She went quiet 3 paces. Then, there's a grammar to it. A brand, a boundary stone, a binding oath. All the same verb. An act somebody performed that somebody has to keep performing. Her chained hand twitched. Most don't. They stamp it once, walk away, and trust the fear to hold the gate shut. So, if the act's lapsed, then it's a closed door with no lock in it. Her jaw set hard. But you'd have to see which one's lapsed. Nobody can. I looked at her wrist, at the brand, at void sitting plain across it, smeared at the edges. That same ink mixed too early, pressed before it ever set. This one, I nodded at her arm. Your brand, when were you marked? 6 years passed, renewed by no one since the magistrate died. She finally turned her head, and her eyes were running a sum I didn't like the look of. Why? 6 years. A binding nobody had signed off on in 6 years, wearing void like a citation I'd written in my own hand. My thumb was already itching against the rope. 30 years I spent closing files, slamming them shut on people. Just once, before that gray man marched me through the gate, I wanted to open one. Hold still, I whispered. I'm going to try something. I found the spot without looking. Thumb to her forearm, dead center of the brand, where the bruised dark ink crossed itself in a knot. The handler's chain swung slack between us. The crowd shoved past, all elbows and fish stink, nobody watching 2 slaves stumble. Her skin was hot under my thumb. The void floated there, smeared at the corner, ink that never set. I pressed. Not magic. I wouldn't know magic if it bit me. I did the only thing 30 years taught my hand to do. I found the lapsed line on the form, and I closed the file on it. Denied. Struck. Annul. Something gave under my thumb. A click with no sound. Mira gasped like she'd been dunked. What did you? The brand moved. I felt it before I saw it. The ink lifted off her skin, not smeared, not scrubbed, lifted. The whole 6-year mark peeling up at its edges like a wax seal worried loose from a deed. It curled, it flaked. A dark scale of it dropped and caught the wet light off the fishmonger's ice, and then it was gone, trodden into the cobbles under a stranger's heel. Her forearm was bare, Brown skin, a pale old burn scar, nothing written there at all. In the corner of my sight, the floating word blinked out. The tally ticked. 4,711. It's off. Her voice came thin. She turned the arm over again, hunting the mark like a missing tooth her tongue kept finding gone. That's not, you can't take a brand off. You burn it. You cut it. It scars. It lapsed, I said. I just filed the paperwork. She looked at me then, and whatever sum she'd been running behind her eyes finished all at once and terrified her. That's when the handler felt the slack. A chain talks. He'd been reading hours by the drag of it, the way I read a wall, and the drag had just changed. He spun mid-stride. His gaze dropped to her wrist, to the bare skin where house paper said a brand should be, and the bored gray went out of his face like a snuffed wick. Hands. He lunged back along the rope, hauling, his fist already swinging for my arm to wrench the thumb off her. Get your hands off her, you! He grabbed my wrist. Too late. The thing was already done. You can't unstrike a struck file. But here's the part that put the floor under me. He grabbed me, and he didn't slap a binding back on. He didn't speak a word and re-weld the mark. He reached for the iron at his belt, the cutting kind, the burning kind, the slow, ugly tools, because that gray-coated professional who'd marched 100 branded souls through this square had no faster way to fix it than meat and fire. He couldn't rewrite it on the spot. Nobody could. The act was lapsed, and he was just a man with a knife. I'd half believed it was a trick of my own busted head, a dead inspector's brain inventing permits on the brick to keep from screaming, right up until his knuckles went white on my wrist, and his eyes went to her arm and stayed there, hunting a word that wasn't coming back. The stamp was real. My thumb had teeth. You felt that, I said to him, grinning, copper back on my tongue. Didn't you? You felt it let go. He yanked the iron free. Mira was already moving. She got her newly bare arm up between us, fast. A scribe who knew exactly what a freed wrist was worth and meant to keep it. And on her skin, where 6 years of ownership had sat without a soul to renew it, there was nothing left to read. Just a woman, off the books, free, in handwriting only I could see, and the ink of it scattered somewhere under the market's 1,000 feet. The sky slammed shut overhead. No thunder worth the name. A flat, heavy bang, the exact sound a ledger makes dropped closed on a clerk's desk, and the whole square felt it down in the teeth. Then, writing tore across the clouds. I'm the only one who reads this stuff. Everyone else just ducked at the noise, hands over hats, pigeons clattering up off the awning. Up there, though, scrawled gray on gray, a fresh line posted itself in a hand I knew too well. Clerk's hand, official, dated today. Unauthorized annulment, logged. My grin went out. The handler felt the slam too. He looked up, iron still bare in his fist, and for one breath, nobody moved. Me, Mira, a Vel man with a blade, while the cloud script finished its thought above all of us. Party unknown, dispatch, east, past the customs roofs, a bell I hadn't heard before started to swing. Wrong pitch, hunting pitch. That's the court, Mira breathed. Her bare arm was still up between us, but her eyes had gone to the sky and stuck. You woke the hall. They log every binding, every one, and you just... I know what a log is. My mouth was dry as paper. I filed plenty. The handler decided for all three of us. He came off the rope swinging. No more cutting, no more careful, just the iron arcing flat at my head, because the smart move now was to drop me before whatever the sky promised showed up. I got my shoulder up. The bar caught it. My arm went to pins and the cobbles tilted under me. His swing cost him the chain. Slack. Mira's wrist clear of it. I grabbed her freed arm, the bare one, the one with nothing left to read, and I hauled. Move! We went into the crowd like a stone into a pond. Behind us, the handler bellowed something with Vel and stop in it, and the iron clanged off the fishmonger's barrow where my skull had been. Ice slid. Herring spilled silver across the stones. Bodies shoved back from him and the blade, opening a lane, and I poured us straight down it. I didn't look up again. Didn't need to. I'd read the whole entry once, and it sat burned behind my eyes, logged, dispatch, and under it, fainter, the part that put the grin right back where the fear had been. The court could log my work. They could send men down every lane in the capital. What they could not do, anywhere on that whole sky, was strike it back on. The line held. Mira ran free at my elbow, proof of it, all lungs and scared eyes, and a pale scar where 6 years used to sit. So the stamp worked. So now they were coming. Fine. The bell found its rhythm. Boots answered it ahead and behind, the dry clap of a city tipping its watchmen out into the lanes, and the market sealed up at our backs like a closing throat. "Where?" she gasped. "Down, away from the bell." I dragged us off the square into the first gut of an alley. Fish stink, shadow, gutter slime under our heels. 2 branded runaways with one bare wrist between them and the whole holy court now inking our names. We ran. The alley kinked, dumped us into a wider run, and the wider run was already loud the wrong way. Boots, coming straight at us. I shoved Mira down behind a stack of eel baskets, and we folded into the reek of them. Court patrol. 6 men, gray and gold, fanned wall to wall. Out front, a seal keeper carried a staff capped with the hall's brass mark, and before I could help it, I'd read the thing. Renewed, current, valid. The first clean seal I'd laid eyes on since I woke in this city. Hate at first sight. He stopped, lifted the staff. The brass caught what little light the lane had. Annulment came down this way. Flat. Bored even. 2 callers on the docket. Find me the dead one. The dead one. A brand gone quiet. Her bare arm. A boy at his hip pointed, right at the baskets, right at the 2 of us breathing fish. I didn't wait for the order. I had Mira's wrist, and I was already reading the wall at our backs, hunting a lapse the way I'd read every locked door in this place, any seal nobody'd bothered to keep alive. There. A culvert grate, old iron, and on the keystone above it, a ward mark half-eaten by green slime. Under the moss, it gave me the one word I wanted. Void. A boundary nobody had renewed. A door standing open, and not one soul knew it. Through here. I kicked the grate. It swung. Behind us, the seal keeper barked one word, and the 6 came on at a run, staff mark bobbing over their heads, boots hammering the cobbles loud enough to feel in my teeth. We dropped down a slick stone throat, came out the far end into water, cold to the shin, then the knee. The whole street was drowned. Sunk doorsteps, a chimney standing alone in green water, a ward where the canal had climbed over the sills one winter and just stayed. Somewhere a beam groaned and settled. Over every rotted roofline, the script hung faint and gray, and I knew that clerk's hand the way you know your own signature. Condemned for demolition, the court's own stamp posted across the whole quarter, waiting on the wreckers. The patrol pulled up hard at the waterline. The seal keeper stayed on dry stone, staff up, jaw tight. He looked at the green water, looked at the script he couldn't read but knew was there, and he did not put one boot in. "Let the ward have them," he said, and turned his men around. Just like that, the chase folded. A district already sentenced isn't worth a wet soul. We waded deeper, past a drowned shrine with the saint's face gone to slime, past a heron standing one-legged on a sunk lintel that didn't so much as flinch for us. The hunting bell finned behind the walls and lost its pitch. I towed Mira into the flooded dark of a street the court had already crossed off its books, and for the first time since the block, nobody at all was coming. "Say it the way they filed it," Mira said. "Not how it sounds, how it's written down." We'd climbed clear of the water into a drowned counting house. 2nd floor, dry boards, one tallow stub she'd nursed back to a flame. The river muttered through the rooms below us. She scratched 3 marks on a slate gone soft with damp. Brand, boundary stone, oath. Her finger dragged a 4th line under all of them. One verb. Somebody binds. Somebody keeps it bound. And the day they stop keeping it, the door hangs open. You see which doors. I only know they're there. She tapped the next mark. This one? Custom seal. Gray. Dead since the clerk who kept it died. This? Gaius. Still lit. Don't touch it. Good. First time she'd said it. A board groaned that wasn't the river. Steel slid out of the dark. A long fish gaff, the hook stopping an inch off my throat. A woman held the other end. Lean, soaked to the hip, a harbor warden's brass plate gone green on her chest. She'd run this drowned quarter since the court crossed it off the maps, and she'd heard every word we said. Off my floor. We're not, Mira started. You came down the culvert. Court came after. Court turned back. The hook didn't waver. That's not luck. That's bait. They float a sweet little annulment down here. The rats come up to taste it, and the wreckers learn exactly where to swing. Nobody sent us. Prove it. Her eyes stayed on me. She says you stamp dead doors live. Show me, or I gaff the pair of you, feed the eels, and the ward keeps it secret one more winter. Fair. Brutal, but fair. I liked her already. I looked past the hook for something good and dead. Found it nailed to the doorpost. A salvage permit. The parchment rotted to brown lace. The wax seal cracked white and powdering off in flakes. It screamed the one gray word I'd come to know better than my own name. Void. Her right to stand here. Killed the hour they condemned the quarter. That yours? Was, before they wrote us off the world. Watch the wax. I set my thumb dead center on the cracked seal, same as I'd set it on Mira's arm, but this time I didn't pull the file open to strike it. I signed it. Approved. Renewed. Filed current. This morning's date. My hand. The wax warmed under my thumb. The cracks ran backward and knit shut. White powder darkened to deep red and went soft, and the dead letters came bleeding up black across the parchment, fresh, wet, an hour old. The warden quit breathing. She reached past the hook and pressed 2 fingers flat to the seal, felt the heat of it, felt new wax give where dust had been a heartbeat before. The gaff dropped, clattered across the boards, and rolled. She went down, one knee, then the other, palms spread over her own living permit like she could trap the warmth inside it. When she lifted her face, the hard eyes had gone wet at the rims. They stamped us out, she said, low and cracked. Year on year, never once stamped us back. I do both. She bowed her head to the wet floor. Then the ward is yours, stamp man. Tell me where to swing. The oilcloth peeled off the back wall in one wet pull. Under it sat a bronze charter plate, big as a coffin lid, green to the bone. The ward's founding deed, hammered into this custom house wall before any of us drew breath. Every letter on it stone dead, void, crown to footing, the one master stamp that ever made the drowned quarter a lawful place to stand. The deed for all of it, the warden said. She kept her voice low. Whole ward, one seal. They killed it the morning they posted the wreckers.
Mira was at my shoulder before I'd taken a step. Voss, that's not a doorway.
I see it.
Renew that and you don't save a room. Her finger hovered an inch off the bronze, afraid to land. You save the ground under every foot down here. I set my palm flat on the cold metal. The seal sat at its base, a poured boss of black wax, cracked through, powdering off in the damp. I pressed my thumb dead center, same as the warden's permit, same as Mira's arm. I didn't open the file to strike. I signed it live. Approved, renewed, filed current, this morning's date, my hand on the whole ward. The bronze warmed under my palm. I felt it travel, heat running out from my thumb along every dead letter, up the plate, into the wall itself. The black wax flushed deep red and went soft. The dead script came bleeding up green gold and fresh, the founding words an hour old again, the whole address signed back into the world. I braced for the sky. Last time I closed to files, the heavens split.
Unauthored, logged, dispatch.
The court screaming murder over my head. I worthed it, counted my own heartbeat in my ears.
Nothing came. No bell, no brand of light. Quiet river, quiet dark. I hadn't broken their law this time. I'd done their own clerk's job. You can't write a man up for renewing a permit. The warden touched the warm wax and made a sound I won't try to spell. It's lit, she breathed. The ward's lit. Read what's still nailed to your walls. I jerked my chin at the dark, at the condemned for demolition pasted across the whole quarter. That order says tear down a void address. There's no void address here anymore. There's a permit. Current. Stamped. I grinned, and it pulled at my split lip. They can't wreck a building that's up to code. It's the law. Their law. Then I heard the water move below us. Not the river. Feet. Wet feet. Slow on a sunk stair. Somebody climbing up out of the flood that had been a tomb an hour ago. A head rose into the tallow light. An old man, collar scar at his throat, knuckles white on the rail. Behind him, a woman with a child on her hip. Behind her, more. Shapes I hadn't known were breathing in the drowned rooms. The wards hidden. The ones who'd gone to ground when the maps crossed them off. They'd felt the plate go warm. Same as the warden. The whole quarter felt it. The old man looked at me, looked at the living bronze, and couldn't make his mouth work. Is it true? He got out. Can we stand here? I looked at that charter plate, red wax soft and breathing, the one address in this whole rotten capital the codex could no longer touch. Stand here, I said. You're on permitted ground. First legal roof in the ward. Anybody comes with a wrecking order, they bring it to me, and I'll read it back at them till it folds. The warden bent and picked her gaff up off the boards. Not to bar the door this time, to hold it. A new light came across the flood, cold and white, nothing like our tallow. It crawled up from the river mouth and lit the drowned doorways one by one. On the stair behind me, the survivors went still. The old man's knuckles found the rail again. A barge slid into the square below the counting house. Flat-bottomed, poled slow, a lantern swinging on an iron hook at the prow. One man stood amidships, long oiled coat, a satchel of seals on a strap, and a brass press the size of a fist where another man would carry his knife. Mira's breath went thin. Sealwright, Vel's own. Her hand closed on my sleeve. He doesn't bring chains, Voss. He brings the stamp. He puts the brand back on. They sent one man. They sent enough. The barge kissed the steps. He never glanced at the warm bronze on the wall. He looked straight at me and unrolled a strip of vellum like a man who'd done this 100 wet nights. Adrian Voss, property, House of Vel, balked before the bell. He let it curl shut. You've cost the house a long night and 2 good boots. Nobody bid on me, I said. Hard to steal what nobody wanted. The house keeps what it pays for. He stepped off the barge, into the flood, calf deep, black to the knee, and didn't flinch. First boot in this ward all night that hadn't begged off the water. Court writ, recovery of 2 collars, signed, current. He spat my own word back at me and liked the taste of it. Then he lifted the lantern and swept it across the stair. The white light found them all. The woman turned her child's face into her shoulder. The old man, the wet shapes behind him, every soul who'd climbed out of the dark an hour ago. Harboring house property, the sealwright said, mild as a clerk reading rates. Every head behind you is another line on the docket. Wade out to me alone, and I lose count. Make me climb those steps, and I bill the lot of them to your account. There it was, the knife under the paperwork. I'd run last time. Down a culvert, river in my lungs. Ran because the dark was the only door left unlocked. My legs wanted it now. The cold off that lantern told them to go. I came down the steps instead, past the warden's lifted gaff, past Mira's grab at my arm. I walked into the flood until it climbed my shins and the chill bit bone, and I stopped 1 pace from him, close enough to smell the hot wax sweating in his satchel. Read me the writ, I said. All of it, out loud. He liked that. He liked an audience. He cracked the court seal with his thumbnail and read, recovery of property, fugitive collars, last known within the drowned ward, condemned, scheduled for demolition, no lawful address. Stop there. I raised 2 fingers toward the vellum, slow, the way I touch a dead seal. Say that last part again. His eyes flicked up. No lawful address within the bounds of, you've got a problem with your paperwork. I nodded back at the bronze, breathing red on the wall. Your writ recovers strays from a void address, marked for the wreckers. There isn't one anymore. The deed went live this morning. Whole ward, current, same hand as your warrant. I let it sit. You're standing in a permitted square holding an order for a place that doesn't exist. For one breath, the only sound was the river working the stairs. Then he smiled and unhooked the brass press from his belt. Clever, he said. The ward's status is the ward's business. My writ's for 2 bodies, not the mud they're rotting in. He thumbed the press. A bead of black wax welled up in its throat, hot, smoking faint over the cold water. I don't need a roof condemned to take what's branded. And you, stamp man, you're still merchandise. Hold still. This one won't fit on your arm. It goes on the brow, right over whatever's already there. He raised the press. I raised my hand, 2 fingers out, level with the smoking wax, the black water dead flat between us. Neither of us moved. The lantern swung once on its hook and hung still. Behind me on the stair, nobody breathed. Behind him, the empty barge rocked and settled. We stood there in the flooded square, his stamp and my hand a foot apart, both of us waiting to learn whose seal bit first. I didn't watch the press. I watched his throat. Under the oiled collar, tight to the cord of his neck, a thin band of script sat where another man wears nothing. Seal rights carry their own seal. Of course they do. You don't hand a man a brand and turn him loose without one. Somebody stamps the stampers. His glowed soft in the corner. The word I read better than my own name. Expired. Who keeps you warm? I said. The press didn't move. Mind your brow, caller. Your oath. The line that makes the court's word come out of your mouth. I lifted my chin at his throat. Somebody re-inks it. Every season, every recovery, a clerk at the hall sits down and signs you current. I let the flood work the steps. Look at the date. Nobody has. Not in a long while. His free hand twitched toward his collar and stopped. He didn't need to feel it. Some part of him already knew. The way a man knows the floor's gone soft before it drops. The writ holds, he said. Quieter now. The writ holds because you hold. You ran out. He drove the press down. Fast, straight for the mark on my brow, wax smoking, the whole weight of the house behind his arm. I caught his collar instead, 2 fingers flat to the warm script under his jaw, and I read it the way I'd read Mira's. Bound to the court of waits, renewed by the hall, last signed, and the date guttered, smeared, long cold. A door with the lock already rusted through. I closed the file. Denied. Struck. Annul. The script under my fingers went out like a wick pinched wet. The press stopped a thumb's width from my forehead. The bead of black wax dropped off its lip, hissed once on the flat water, and was gone. He stood there with his arm still raised and nothing behind it. No court in his veins, no hall on his tongue. Just a man in a cold river holding a fist of brass that didn't mean a thing anymore. He felt it leave. I watched it go through him. His jaw worked. The vellum in his other hand sagged. The words on it just ink now, ordering a free man to fetch 2 strangers for people who'd never re-signed his leash. What did you do? He whispered. Not a question. He'd spent his life doing the other half of it. No sky cracked, no alert. Renewing draws no log, and neither, it turns out, does cutting a hunter loose from a string the hall forgot to tie off. Behind me, the stair was dead silent. The woman with the child had gone still. The old man stared at the dark throat where the writing used to be. I leaned in, water to my shins, and banked the thing I'd just learned where only the 2 of us could hear it. They didn't renew you either. I gave it to him slow. They send you to drag us back, and they can't keep your own collar lit. Every dog they loose on me is running on paper that already lapsed. I stepped back. Go check the others. Go check all of them. He looked at the press in his hand. Then he let it fall. It hit the water and sank without a sound. He didn't lunge. He didn't reach for the satchel of seals. He turned, slow, and waded back toward the barge through the flood the court patrol had refused to enter, climbed aboard, and set his hand on the pole. A court enforcer with no court left in him, working out which way a river runs for a man who suddenly owns his own feet. Then he pulled out into the dark, free, and left his writ floating face down on the water behind him. By full light, I'd left the water behind. We came up out of the drowned ward onto dry stone, Mira at my shoulder, the old man and a clutch of the saved strung out behind me, and I walked uphill into the open street where the city ground its knives. No hood this time, no culvert. I'd crawled under this town long enough. I wanted to knock on a door from the front and watch it open. The Cutler's Guild stood behind iron-banded oak, a whetstone carved over the lintel. I put both palms flat and pushed. Heat first, then the shriek, steel on spinning stone, sparks fanning off a long row of knuckles, a dozen men bent to the wheels, and not one head lifting. They'd been taught not to. Floors shut to beggars. The guildmaster came down off a raised desk, leather apron, a brass chain of office bouncing on his gut, a finished cleaver still in his fist. He took in my collar, my wet hem, the burn smoking faint on my brow, and his lip peeled back off his teeth. I know that face. Half the hall does by now. He swept the cleaver at his hall, his wheels, his wealth. The forger. Signs dead paper live down in the mud. Well, sign something up here, caller. Nothing in this house is lapsed. We pay our dues to the day. Your charter, sure, paid up. I looked past him, down the row of bent backs. Them, though. He snapped his fingers. Two broad men set down their work and lifted cudgels off the wall. Marl, Bronze. Bored, almost kind. Walk it back to the river. They came at me across the sawdust. I didn't run. I took the nearest man at his wheel by the wrist. A boy, 16 maybe, a guild mark burned blue into the back of his hand where the strap had rubbed it raw. I turned the hand over and read it the way I read all of it now. Bound to the cutlers of this house. Term, indenture, to be recut each year by the master's seal. The date under it sat gray and gummed and years cold. They'd kept taking his work. They'd quit retaking their grip. Hold still, I told the boy. The cudgels were 3 strides off. Denied, struck, annul. The blue went out of his hand under my thumb. He felt it go. His head came up, first chin to lift on that floor in God knows how long. Then I went down the line. Wrist, wheel, mark, struck. Neck stone, struck. I worked the row with both hands and didn't hurry, and every blue brand I touched guttered cold and stayed cold. And the men behind them came off the wheels and stood, one after another, a sagged fence pulling itself straight. The guildmaster's face fell apart in pieces. Stop! You can't! Those are bought indentures. Those are property! Expired indentures. I kept moving. You let the seal die and kept the men. I just read you the year you stopped paying for them. Marl and Bronze had pulled up short in the middle of the floor. They stood with the cudgels half raised, and I watched the bigger one turn his own hand over and stare at the blue crawling up his own wrist. You too, I said. Both of you. He never recut yours either. I crossed to them, took Marl's wrist, then Bronze's, struck, and the cudgels came down to their sides, then down to the floor. 2 thuds in the sawdust. Nobody picked them up. The wheels were still spinning. Nobody bent to them. The guildmaster stood alone in the middle of his hall with a cleaver in one fist and a chain of office that didn't run a single man in the room. He opened his mouth. He looked at the door behind me. For guards, for the hall, for anybody whose name still meant something here. Ring the bell, I said. Go on. See who comes when you pull it. See who in this house still answers to that chain. His hand didn't move toward the rope. Behind me, the whole floor had turned my way. 3 dozen freed cutlers with bare hands and good steel, waiting to hear what a man does next when he owns his own arms again. I grinned. Right. Who wants paying work? The debtor's tower waited at the top of the hill. One iron door, no windows low enough for a man to reach. We'd come straight up from the cutler's floor, and I climbed the slope with the whole loud crowd strung out behind me. Mira at my elbow, the freed cutlers with their blades still in hand, the old man limping at the rear, word of the morning running on ahead of us into every gutter and stairwell. The door stayed shut. Somebody had heard us coming and thrown the bar. I put my palm flat on the iron, cold as a coin off a dead man. Beside the gate, under a tin hood to keep the rain off, hung the founding warrant, vellum behind cracked glass. The grant that let this house lock men away for what they owed. I leaned in and read it the way I read everything now. By order of the Crown of Haldoon, to hold the indebted until the debt is discharged, sealed once, to be recut each reign. The reign that sealed it was 100 years cold. No hand had renewed it since. The crown itself was gone, the line dead, the seal matrix long since melted down for somebody's dinner plate. A hatch banged open in the door. "Move it along." A face filled the grill, heavy jowls, a wet pink mouth, a warden's chain. "Lawful house this. These men owe. You don't walk dead off with a mob at the gate." "Show me your renewal," I said. "My what?" "The warrant over your door. Last stamp on it is 100 years old. Who's been keeping it live?" He didn't answer that. He did the other thing. "Bows!" Heads came up over the parapet. Crossbows cranked and ugly, leveling down at the people behind me. Mira didn't step back. None of them stepped back, which is the kind of thing that makes a man with a bow start thinking hard about his afternoon. The warden shoved out through a sally door at the base, 2 guards at his shoulders, and made straight for the old man, grabbed his collar, hauled him half off his feet. "This one's on my rolls. I'll take him in front of the lot of you, and then we'll—" I didn't argue with him. I reached past his arm and laid both hands flat on the glass over the warrant. Lapsed, struck, void. The black wax under my palms went gray, then white, then to dust behind the glass. Inside the tower, something let go. A long iron groan. Bars sliding in 100 throats at once. Every cell this dead paper had ever held shut. The great door shuddered on its hinges. The warden still had the old man's collar twisted in his fist when the bolt he was so proud of slammed back on its own and the iron swung wide on a hall full of upturned faces. They came out blinking into the daylight, 100 and more, wrists soft and white where the irons had ridden, and not one of them looked at the warden. They were all looking at me. "You held them on a dead king's word," I told him, loud enough to climb the wall. "There's nothing under your hand now but rust." His key was still in his fist. He stared at it like it had bitten him. Up on the parapet, the guards were already setting their bows down, slow, the way men move when they've just watched their own wages turn to paper. Down in the yard, a clerk in good wool snatched a ledger off a desk and bolted, out the sally door, downhill, toward the other towers that drank from the same ink. Let him run. By the time he reached the first one, I'd be standing under its warrant too. The old man tugged his crushed collar straight. Mira was grinning at me, that dangerous grin she gets. I turned to 100 new faces and let the gate stand all the way open behind me. "Right," I said. "Who else wants their name back?" The iron came down on a freedman's forearm and his skin sang where it touched. We'd followed the clerk's trail down into the Cooper Square, the loud crowd thinning behind me as it went, and there, in the middle of the cobbles, stood a folding desk, a brazier glowing orange, and a man in a black coat working a brand like he was sealing crates. Vel. The runaway clerk stood at his shoulder, ledger open, reading names off it one by one. 2 bailiffs pinned the freedman's wrist flat to the board. The mark bit in. "Debtor. Fresh and smokin'." "Next," Vel said. He didn't look up. I shoved through. Mira came with me, the old man hobbling at our heels, and the crowd that had cheered me up the hill shut its mouth. "That brand comes off a dead king's matrix," I said. "Same dust I struck this morning. You've no more right to burn it back on than the warden had to." I have every right. Now he looked up. Soft hands, ink under the nails, a clerk's squint that had never seen weather. These rolls are mine, Inspector. Recut this dawn, sealed this hour, by a living authority. He turned a page toward me, black wax, still warm, pressed deep enough to throw a shadow. You melt the old law, I cut new. The only difference between us, friend, is a license. The branded man wept without a sound, cradling his arm against his chest. I laid my palm flat on the page to read it dead. The wax stayed black under my hand. Live, legible, binding. I pushed harder, the way you lean on a door you know is locked, and nothing in it loosened at all. Vel watched my face do the math. Yes, he said, soft. Read it. It's good paper. A whistle cut down the lane. More bailiffs, and behind them, a coffle of chain. The freed marched back, collared 2 by 2, the baker and the tinsmith, and a dozen men whose wrists I'd watched go white at the tower not an hour before. They dragged past close enough to touch. One of them caught my eye and looked down at his own boots. Then the bills went up. 2 runners slapped wet paper to the well post, the chapel door, the pillory frame, and I read it clear across the square before I'd taken a step. Counterfeit, by order, a man passing false seals, melting lawful crown ink, defrauding the houses of Halden of their honest debts. Take him down where he stands. There was a price printed under it, a fat one, and there was a name set in good black type where I had never once given mine. Voss. The square that had carried me up that hill took 1 step back from me. Vel pressed his neck seal home and reached for the iron again. Run if it pleases you, Voss, he said, pleasant as a man offering tea. Every brand you struck, I'll recut by nightfall. Every name you handed back, I'll take into my book. You can read paper. He set the brand in the coals and smiled at the glow. I can make it. Let's see whose holds longer. Mira's hand closed on my sleeve. Her voice came low and flat, not for him. Voss, there's a crossbow on the chapel roof, and the man behind it has just read your number. The night warden's lamp swung across the stairfoot and kept climbing without us. We pressed flat to cold stone until the light bent round the turn above and was gone. Mira let out 1 breath through her teeth. We'd handed Vel his brazier and his bounty and circled back after dark, up the record spire servant stair, because a man stamped counterfeit answers in good ink, or he doesn't answer at all. A door barred the second landing, and across its seam, somebody had pressed a warding seal the size of my palm. Green wax, a clerk's saint thumbed into it, the sort that shrieks the floor awake if you crack it wrong. I set 2 fingers on it and read down through the green. There was a date under all that piety, renewed by a steward, 3 governors in the ground. I leaned, the way I'd leaned on the tower that morning, and the wax went soft and gray and dead under my thumb. The latch gave without a whisper. Higher up, a sub-clerk dozed at a checkpoint desk with a writ pinned at his elbow. That one I couldn't touch. Black wax, sealed this week, live as the page Vel had shoved in my face. So Mira did it instead. She stepped full into the lamplight, chin level, and rattled the cant off cold. Night audit, spire authority, 2 hands cleared to the deep stacks, by standing order, countersign, on file. Every clause in its slot, the comma where the form wants a comma. The clerk's eyes cracked, found nothing wrong in the shape of her words, and slid shut again. He waved us by with 2 fingers and went back to his nap. Grammar, she murmured as we passed. It's all grammar with these people. The deep stack door stood iron-bound and a head taller than the both of us, and the lock in it was older than the mortar, which made it mine. I laid my palm to the boltwork and read it blind. The throw of it, the wards, the dead old language cut into the brass, and talked the thing open, tumbler by tumbler, until it sighed. We slid through the gap. I dragged the iron shut behind us, slow, until it kissed the frame. Cold in there. Dust and cracked leather and the flat mineral smell of paper nobody's breathed on in lifetimes. Shelving climbed up past the candle's reach into pure black. And dead center, chained by its spine to a stone lectern under a lamp gone out, sat the thing every other book in Haldoon is only a copy of, the Master Ledger, the Codex itself. The book Vel cited at me with ink under his nails. Mira struck a stub of candle and shielded it with her hand. The flame caught the brass clasp and threw our shadows long up the stacks. "There it is," she said, barely sound at all. "Every statute that holds the empire on its feet. One spine." I put my hand flat on the cover before I lifted a single page. Old habit, read the house before you crack the safe. And under my palm, the leather gave off a wrongness I knew. Faint, the same hum I'd felt off a dead king's warrant at dawn. I didn't say it, not yet. I worked the clasp with my thumb until the catch let go. "Vel quoted this at me like scripture," I said, and got my fingers under the cover. "Let's see what it actually says." I lifted it. Gold leaf flared where the candle caught it, and the founding writ of Haldun lay open under my hand. Red capitals, a clerk's script 500 years cold. I laid my palm flat and read down through it. Dates first. Always the dates. The clerks bury the truth in the corner where nobody pious ever looks, and there it sat in faded brown. Sealed under the crown in the founding year, the master seal struck once to bind every statute beneath it ever after. Pretty words. I kept reading. "Well," Mira breathed, "is it scripture?" "Hold the light closer." She did. I turned leaves, the paper stiff, slow to lift, past the writs of the houses, past the law of collars and debts, past the very clause Vel had quoted at me word for word in the square. All of it good ink, all of it real. Every line of it leaning on one thing, the master seal at the back, the green gold round that makes the whole book law. I turned to it. There, pressed into the last leaf, big as my spread hand, the seal every brand in the empire is only a grandchild of. I set 3 fingers to the wax and a thumb at its edge, the way I'd touched the saint on the stair, and read the date cut under the gilt. My hand went still. "Vas." Her voice dropped. "What?" I read it again, read the renewal clause beside it, the small print the founders had cut into their own miracle. This seal to be struck anew at each accession of the crown, lest it lapse. Then the line under that, the last renewal logged. A king 4 reigns gone, the ink brown to the color of weak tea. "Nobody renewed it," I said. "Renewed what?" "This." I tapped the wax, and under my fingertip it gave off that same low wrongness. The dead king hum. Faint and rotten, the exact note I'd caught off the warrant at dawn and the cover an hour ago. Not because it was holy, because it was the same kind of corpse. The seal that holds the whole book up. It expired, 4 reigns back. Nobody struck a new one. Mira's mouth opened and shut. Wax ran over her knuckles from the stub, and she didn't flinch. "Say it plain," she whispered. So I said it plain. Every statute in here draws its teeth from that round of wax. The collars, the debts, Vel's writ, the price on my head. All of it stands because this stands. I looked up at her over the guttering flame. "And this hasn't been law since before your grandmother was branded. It's lapsed, top to bottom." She stared at the date as if it might change. "That can't. Voss, the entire city runs on this." "I know." My thumb still rested on the dead seal, and it would not warm under me. They've been collecting on a debt they let expire and never told a soul. Every brand they ever burned, they burned on paper as dead as the man who sealed it. I'd been killing lapsed seals all morning, 2 fingers and a thumb at a time. 1 tower, 1 floor, 1 frightened steward's saint. Here, chained to a rock under a lamp gone out, was the parent of every one of them. Already gray, already gone. Just waiting for somebody to lay a hand on it and read the date aloud. Mira found my eyes. "If this is true," she said slowly, "then nothing out there is binding. Not one collar. Not one. Then who do we tell?" Her knuckles whitened on the candle. "They'll burn this book before a word of it gets past those doors." The flame hissed down toward her fingers, and somewhere far below us, through all that stone, a checkpoint bell began to ring. "Make way! Let them through!" Mira's shout cut ahead of me as I came off the last stair with the codex hugged to my chest, all that dead empire knocking its corners against my ribs. Founders Square was already filling. The checkpoint bell had done my advertising for free. Every door off the plaza had spilled somebody onto the cobbles. Dockhands and a fishwife with her tray, and 2 off-duty wardens who hadn't decided yet which way to point their pikes. I needed a wall nobody could pretend not to see. The great doors of the record spire gave me one. 12 feet of black oak, iron-studded, the single surface in this city that every soul walks past and not one dares to mark. "Spike," I said. She slapped a 4-inch pin into my palm, pried from the door's own hinge plate, still warm where she'd wrenched it loose. I laid the codex flat against the oak, thumbed it open to the renewal log, and set the point through the outer margin where no word would tear. One blow. The iron sank, the book hung there pinned and open, and the green gold master seal faced the square for the first time in 500 years. "Read the date!" I turned and threw it at them, throat raw. "The founding seal of Halden. Somebody up front, read the year aloud." A boy near the bottom step squinted and read it, stumbling, and a cooper beside him read the line under it, "The last renewal, 4 Kings Cold." A clerk in Vels Grey came up the steps 2 at a time. "Seditious matter, by order of the court that comes down," and his fist closed on the spine. I caught his wrist before he could pull. "It's a filed record, friend. You, of all people, don't get to touch a filed record." He yanked anyway. The leaf groaned. A second Grey came in low with a paring knife already open, going for the margin to cut the page free of the spike, and Mira put her shoulder into his arm and walked him 3 steps sideways into the door jamb before he got the blade up. "Read it!" I roared over the scuffle. "Don't take it from me. Take it from the wax." The seals lapsed. The whole book's lapsed. Every collar in this city was burned on dead paper. The first clerk wrenched. I let his own weight carry him, stepped in, and clamped both his hands flat to the cover. "Lay a palm on it," I said into his face. "Quiet now, just for him. You felt it when you grabbed it. Cold. No hum. You collect for a corpse." His fingers went slack on the leather. He felt it. I saw the exact second he felt it, his mouth working with nothing coming out. Down in the square, the cooper had got to the renewal clause and was reading it again, louder, for the people behind him, and the date ran back through the crowd from mouth to mouth. 4 rains gone, until a woman with a debtor's collar still riveted at her throat shoved to the front and put her own 2 fingers on the dead wax and started to laugh, hard and ugly, the way you laugh when a thing that's owned you your whole life turns out to be made of nothing. That was the turn. I'd spent the whole day undoing brands 1 frightened steward at a time. Here was the whole register, nailed open in daylight, doing the work for me. 1,000 people reading 1 dead date, and 1,000 collars going quiet at once. The clerk I'd pinned stopped fighting. The knife man stood with his blade down, staring up at the date like the rest of them. "You can't unspeak it now," I told the Grey, and stepped back off the steps into the crowd, leaving the book hung where it was. "It's read." A bell answered from the heights. Not the checkpoint's clang this time, but a single deep note off the court roof above the spire. Slow, deliberate, the sound a man makes when he's done chasing you and has decided to stop. Heads turned up toward it. Across the square, shutters banged open. A baker came out wiping his hands. A child climbed a rain barrel to see. The whole capital lifting its face to that note at once. It rang twice more, and whatever Vel had just reached for, it wasn't a writ. A wrecking hook the size of a ship's anchor swung in on a chain and bit the corner of the almshouse, and the old brick leaned out over the lane like a drunk who'd finally decided to fall. I'd run the whole way down from the square, Eel Stairs, the gutter lanes, into the drowned ward, where I'd parked 200 frightened people behind 1 good piece of paper and told them they were safe. They weren't moving. They stood in their doorways watching the hook. So did Mira at my shoulder, breathing hard from the run. In the middle of the lane stood a man in court black with a brass trumpet and a scroll, and behind him a demolition gang, 12 wrights with mauls on their shoulders, and a winch crew already cranking the chain back for a second swing. "By condemnation of the Holy Court," the black coat read, The ward known as the Drowned is declared unsound, forfeit, and slated for clearance before dark. Stop the winch, I called, walking in. I carry the permit on this ward, and it's older than your grandfather. The crew didn't stop. The black coat didn't even turn his head. Then Vel stepped out from behind the winch frame. No knife, no gray clerks, no bounty sheet in his fist. Just him, ink dried on his cuffs, hands folded, calm as a man who stopped running because he doesn't need his legs anymore. Read it to him, Vel said. He likes to read. I had the master permit out already, vellum gone soft as cloth, the ward's grant of standing, struck and sealed and never once lapsed in 300 years. I held it up the length of the lane. Drowned ward, chartered protection. You can't pull a roof that's covered by a permit, Vel said. License is a thing to stand. It does not forbid the court from condemning the ground it stands on. He tipped his chin at the black coat. Different instrument. Yours says these houses may exist. Mine says they're a danger and must not. They're not a danger. The court has found that they are. Something near a smile crossed him. You taught me a thing today, Inspector. A man can't strike a dead seal off a writ. So I quit bringing you writs to break. He held the condemnation out himself, wanted me to take it. So I took it. I laid my palm flat across the wax the way I'd done 100 times today, reaching for the old hum, the dead king cold, the laps I could pry a whole city open with. Nothing dead in it. It came up warm under my hand, this morning's wax, a seal not 4 hours old, beating warm and new against my skin. No corpse to read, no 4 rains rot to throw in his teeth. The freshest law in Halden, and it had 200 roofs in its jaws. This week's writ, I said. My thumb wouldn't lift off it. This hour's. Vel drew the scroll back, gentle, like taking a knife from a child. Writes, the winch let go. The hook came down the second time and went through the almshouse wall instead of off it, and the brick didn't lean now. It went, a whole face of it folding into the lane in a churn of gray dust and a sound like the ward clearing its throat to scream. People ran. The fishwife dropped her tray and it rang on the cobbles, herrings spilling silver under running feet. A gray-headed cooper I'd freed at dawn stood rooted in his own doorway while the lintel sagged over his skull, and I had Mira's sleeve bunched in my fist and was driving toward him against a tide of bodies all going the other way. The next house took its hook before I reached him. Dust rolled up the lane in a wall and swallowed the winch, the black coat, Vel, all of it gone white and roaring. A child somewhere in it was screaming the same name over and over, and when the cloud thinned enough to see an arm's length in front of me, the fist I'd closed on her sleeve had nothing in it. 2 courtmen had Mira by the elbows, hauling her backward out of the dust, and her heels carved 2 long furrows through the spilled herrings as she fought them. Was! She got an arm loose and drove the heel of it into a black coat's throat. He barely grunted, and the other one caught her wrist and folded it up behind her back. I went over a fallen lintel and through a freed dyer who grabbed my coat to save himself, and I shed him and kept driving toward the 2 backs hauling her off. The dust thinned. I could see the brass buttons on their collars, the Holy Court double key stamped on each. A maul came across my chest, flat of the head, 2-handed, and it folded me over my own breath and dumped me on one knee in the muck. The right who'd swung it didn't even look down. He set the maul head on the cobble and leaned on the haft, blocking the lane, while behind him the crew kept feeding the winch and another roof came apart with a sound like a barrel staved in. Mira screamed my name a 3rd time, smaller now, from inside the white. I got up, got a hand on the haft and shoved it aside, and there was Vel, stepped clean out of the dust, ink dry and unhurried, watching his men carry my friend toward a black court wagon parked at the mouth of the lane. Easy, Inspector, he said. Look, she's not hurt. She's invited. The 2 men lifted Mira off her feet and pitched her up into the wagon's iron belly, and she hit the floor of it hard and came up on her knees facing the bars. The door rang shut. A bolt slid home. Fresh oil, no rust. I heard it bite from 20 feet. You can't take her. She's done nothing, your court. She has a name on a sheet now, same as yours. Vel turned the words over without heat, the flat voice he'd used handing me the warrant a minute ago. Accessory, theft of a chained codex. The court will want to ask her things, at length. I took a step and the right slid the maul back across my path. Hear the rest. He never raises his voice. He doesn't need to. She sleeps in a cell under the spire tonight. You know the door. You broke the one above it this morning. The Lord Auditor sends you one line, and I'll give it to you plain, so you can't read it any way but straight. The winch crew stopped cranking, and for one breath the whole roaring lane went quiet enough to hear the wagon horse stamp once on the stones. Even the dust seemed to wait on him. Present yourself at the court. Stand and be read. Do that, and she walks out the same hour. He let it settle. Stay loose in my city, and every day you run is a day she answers for in that cell. Her hand for yours, Inspector. That's the whole instrument. Behind me, the crew had pulled close. The gray cooper coughing brick out of his lungs, the fishwife with empty hands, a boy wearing someone else's blood down his shirt. 200 people I'd sworn were safe, every one of them looking at me now instead of at the wagon. The driver clucked to his horse. Wheels turned. They hauled her uphill toward the spire, toward a cell with my morning's broken lock somewhere above it, and my feet wanted the cobbles so badly the right tipped his maul an inch closer to remind them. Vel watched me not move, and that was the cut of it. He'd found the one rope I'd follow anywhere, and he meant to walk me in on the end of it. Sundown, he said, and stepped back into his gang. Don't make her wait the night. Vel lifted 2 fingers, and the slack winch rope dropped to the cobbles with a clatter. Back a moment, Inspector. His back stayed to me as he said it, his raised hand holding the whole wrecking crew off the rope until I came. Where the light falls on your face. The right dragged his maul off my path and stepped wide, the first clean yard of lane he'd given me all afternoon, and I took it, knowing the bait in it. Vel wanted me walking to him upright, not hauled there. I walked. 200 people came with me at my back, breathing brick. He let me come close enough to smell the ink off his collar. Then his gaze climbed past my eyes to the brand above them. You've worn that since the morning you crawled awake in my city, and you've read it wrong every hour since, he said. A dead man's mark, you decided. Some dead slave's brand gone soft, expired down in the corner where even you could read it. You got that far, and you stopped. I read it true. The dust had sanded my voice to wet gravel, but I put what was left of it straight at him. It lapsed, same as every chain you people rivet onto a living throat. It lapsed. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Here's the joke, Inspector. The one paper in this city you carry day and night, and you've never read it straight once, because it sits in the single place your own 2 eyes can't reach. He drew a folded sheet from his coat, heavy stock, green gold seal still tacky at the edge, and held it flat beside my cheek, so the crowd at my back could line the 2 things up, his warrant and my brand, stroke for stroke. He wanted witnesses. It's no caller, Voss. First time he'd used my name, and he set it down between us like he was laying a tool on a bench. Collars keep a man on his feet and working. This one's in order to take the man down to the ground. His finger found the top line and crawled along it slow, so that not one word could slip past me. Structure surveyed, found unsound, a pause to let it cut. Condemned beyond repair. That's what sat on your skull since the morning you woke, while you spent all day reading every law in the city but the one stamped on you. Behind me, the cooper had stopped coughing. The breath I drew wouldn't go down past the place the maul head had folded my chest flat against itself. A man isn't a building, I said. You unmake dead law with your bare hands. The court unmakes condemned ground with hooks. Look down your own lane if you've forgotten how it goes. He turned the sheet a quarter so its bottom edge caught the low sun. Every order like this one carries a day the works begin. The Lord Auditor set yours this morning, the same hour your codex went up nailed to his doors. Fresh wax, not a lapse in it anywhere for you to pick loose. His fingernails stopped on the last line. Then he read the date out to me. Flat, unhurried, the voice you'd use for a hanging. A saint's feast I'd scrubbed court floors for as a boy. I'd done the sum before I could stop my own head from counting. 4 days. 4 days, and the wrecking crew starts with me. He folded the warrant away slow, the way you pocket a watch you've already wound, and turned back into his crew without one more word, leaving me a sundown for Mira, 4 days for myself, and a clock ticking on the only document in the world I would never get to read. The Grey Cooper reached me first, his split-knuckled hand closing on my sleeve before the Wrights had even stooped for their dropped rope. He didn't tell me to let it go. He looked at the mark over my eyes, then up the hill where the black wagon had carried Mira off. 4 days on your head, he rasped, the cough still riding it, and her by dark. 1 pair of boots can't run both, lad. The fishwife stood past his shoulder with her empty hands open at her sides, the way you hold them when there's nothing left in them to give. The boy hadn't moved. Another man's blood had dried to rust down his shirt, and he watched me the way children watch a grown man decide whether to bolt. I looked at the lane instead. Splinter and slate, the ward I'd sworn safe, peeled open to the sky, and Vel's crew coiling their winch rope slow because the law was theirs, and the law is never in a hurry. That's when I quit doing the arithmetic. I'd stood there the whole long afternoon balancing it like a ledger, her cell against my skull, sundown against 4 days, which thing I'd lose the slower. Triage, defense, a clerk picking the cheaper loss while the city took a ward off the map behind his back. I'd been letting Vel hold the pen. He wants me on his court steps by dark, I said, cap in hand, asking nice. The Cooper's grip went hard. That's the trap. Don't walk it. I'm walking it. I lifted his fingers off my sleeve, easy, and set his hand back against his own chest. Just not on my knees, and not to ask. The fishwife's chin came up. The whole Seal Right Corps stands that door. Every enforcer in the city, shoulder to shoulder. Good. My chest still wouldn't take a full pull of air past the folded place, so I took half of one and made it carry. All day I've laid hands on every scrap of law in this city. Collars, warrants, the dead codex nailed to his doors. Every paper but the one I can't reach. I touched the brand without looking up at it. So leave that one. I'll read the rest. I turned the thing over once in my head. A demolition order on me. 4 days to works begin and no lapse anywhere in it to pick loose. The one document in the realm I'd never get my 2 hands flat against. Fine. Stop clawing at your own skull. Put both palms on something that'll answer back. There's a building stuffed fuller with paper than any roof in the city. Seals, writs, the court's whole armed corps, and every cord knotted around every one of their throats. Mira's behind that door, I told them. So's every order those men ever signed. I mean to go in and lay hands on the lot of it. The Cooper coughed, wiped his mouth red, and held my eye a long second. 200 of us can't fight the court. I'm not asking anybody to fight. I was already turning uphill, the warped lane sucking at my boots, the low sun throwing the spire's long shadow down to meet me halfway. I'm asking you to walk, slow, loud, right up onto their front step beside me. Feet shifted on broken slate behind me. 1 pair, then a dozen, then the whole breathing weight of them coming up off the rubble at my back. Sundown sat an hour off, the court an uphill mile, and somewhere between me and Mira waited every sealed enforcer the city could field. And I went up toward them with 2 empty hands, and no notion yet whether that door would open for me or shut on my neck. 20 graycoats stepped into the mouth of the court stair and brought their pikes down level, one bristling wall between me and the great doors. The captain stood 3 steps above them, a corded collar at his throat, looking down at the 200 ragged souls breathing at my back. Far enough, he called. The man in the brand, kneel. The rest of you, home, before we make a yard of you. I didn't kneel. I climbed 1 step, both hands open where he could count them empty, and stopped near enough to read the cord knotted at his throat. Here's the thing about a corps. They put a leash on everyone, even the dogs they trust to bite. Your name, Captain, I said. Back, now! Karth! A freedman behind me said it low and certain. He took my brother's hand in the tanner's yard. Karth! The captain's pike came level with my chest, point steady, knuckles bled white on the haft. Last word I give you. So I put my hand flat on his collar. He jerked like I'd laid a coal on him, but a collar is just paper twisted into a cord, and paper opens for me whether the man it's choking wants it or not. The gayish spread under my fingers. Bound service to the court, 20 years and a day, sealed under the supreme stamp of the realm, the same dead king's hand I'd read off the codex this afternoon. 4 rains cold. You feel that knot at your neck, Karth? I said it loud for the whole front rank. A corpse tied it. The hand that swore you to this door has been bones since your grandfather was a boy. You're not court sworn. You're wearing a noose nobody troubled to cut. His eyes went sideways to the seal at his own throat. He tried to read it the way a man reads a sum he prays is wrong. A voice came down out of the doorway's shadow, dry, unhurried, a clerk's voice I'd know with my eyes shut. Vel stood just inside the great doors with a wax jack burning at his elbow and a fresh stamp turning in his fingers, and he never lifts his voice, because a man who holds the pen never has to. Don't heed the condemned, Captain. His stamp clicked against his palm. Take him. I will recut every collar on these steps before his knees hit the third one. 200 gayas, 1 waxjack. I still hadn't looked up at him. Cut away, I'll watch. Then I stopped watching. I dragged my thumb over Karth's seal and pushed the void through it cold. The wax cracked gray under my nail. The cord at his throat sagged open, and the riveted iron beneath it hung there sworn to nobody at all. Karth's hand came loose. The pike rang down the steps and lay still. The kid beside him stared at the dead cord in my fist and made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Show me your throats, I told them. All of them now. I went 3 down the front rank fast. Hand, seal, red. Lapsed. A cord fell. Lapsed. Lapsed. Gesh after gesh, every one stamped by the same dead hand. Recut! Vel's stamp came down hard on hot wax, once, and 1 collar in the third rank sealed bright and held. He was right. No clerk alive cuts faster. He just couldn't cut 100 before I reached the 1 seal that held them all. I left the rank. I went up past the captain to the great doors and put both palms flat on the muster writ cut into the door beam. The standing order that posted every greycoat to this stair. The corps' whole leash knotted into a single stamp. Vel saw where my hands landed, and for once the patience dropped off his face. Don't, I read it and voided it in the same breath. Every cord on the stair went slack at once. 60 throats, 80. A soft leather sigh running down the steps as a dead king's order let go of all of them together. Pikes lowered. Men touched their own necks and found the knot gone. Karth, I said, there's a woman in a cell under your spire, named on a sheet that dead hand can't hold either. You going to keep watch over her grave, or open the door? He looked at the loose cord in his fist. He looked at Vel. He bent, took up his fallen tyke, and for one breath I didn't know which way the point would turn. Then he reversed it, butt to the wood, and set his shoulder to the great doors beside mine. Behind us, the whole gray corps turned its back on the man who'd sworn them. 200 freed and 100 unleashed enforcers. 1 wait, leaning into the court's last shut door. From the far side I heard Vel, not calling for guards now, just 1 flat sentence through the wood. That the cell under the spire had been sealed an hour past in living wax, and I, of all men, knew what living wax did to my hands. Then the door began to give. The right-hand door tore off its lower hinge and went down flat, and 200 shoulders walked across it into the cold marble of the court. We came in over the wreck of it, boots on fallen oak. The greycoats led now, hooks and bars on their shoulders, and the freed pressed in behind them where this same iron had been pulling roofs down on their heads at dawn. Vel stood at the foot of the inner stair, Waxjack still lit, a fresh stamp in his fist. 4 clerks fanned across the arch behind him, with the faces of men who'd never carried anything heavier than a pen. "Captain Karth!" He didn't look at me. "These steps are court ground. Hold your core." "Core held the door for him," Karth said. "Not for you." Vel's stamp came down on the keystone of the arch, hot wax hissing into the old cut. "Then it's sealed. Court current, this minute. The girl stays posted, and you, Inspector, can lay every dead hand you own on a door that isn't dead." He'd watched me read the muster writ. He'd built his last wall out of the one thing my fingers slide off, so I didn't reach for it. "Show me her cell," I told Karth. Down. A stair behind the arch, narrow, the air going wet and close, the spire's root where the cells were cut into living rock. Mira's was the third. A plank door, iron-strapped, and across the seam, a fat lozenge of wax still warm enough to shine. Cut within the hour, the realm's stamp bright and unlapsed in the middle of it. I put my hand on it anyway. You'd have done the same. Nothing. No date, no dead king, no slack thread to drag loose. Just wax that didn't care whose hand I was, sitting on the wood like a closed eye that wouldn't open. My thumb went over it, and the void went nowhere. "Voss," Mira's voice, through the plank, hoarse. "Don't burn it on the seal. I heard him cut it live." Vel's voice drifted down the well of the stair, unhurried. "He can't void living law, girl. He'll stand there reading it till the worksmen come for his forehead." The brand pulled tight at my hairline. 4 days. Then I looked at the crowbar on Karth's shoulder, at the hooks his men had hauled up the whole hill, the same iron that took the drowned ward apart, joist by joist, this morning. "Karth," I stepped clear of the door. "You raised a ward before noon with that. 1 plank won't trouble you." The captain looked at the bright seal. He looked at me. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, and he set the flat of his bar to the seam beside the wax. Not through the stamp, around it, into the wood the stamp was so proud to hold. "A seal's only as strong as the plank under it," he said, and leaned. The wood screamed. 2 more graycoats drove their bars in beside his, hauled together, and the door no clerk's hand could open came off its straps in a burst of splinters, with the seal still whole and useless in the middle of it. Mira was on her feet before the dust dropped, wrists rubbed raw, a bruise going green along her jaw, that accessory sheet still pinned to her sleeve, and she stepped over the broken door, staring past me at the men who'd built it. "You brought the hooks," she said. "Borrowed them." I caught her arm. One of us was shaking. Their wax, our iron. Vel forgot there was a difference. He didn't forget. She tore the sheet off her sleeve and let it fall. "He's already gone up. Heard him on the stair the second your boys hit the wood." I looked up the throat of the stair. The waxjack's glow had moved, climbing, not running for a way out, inward, toward the top of the spire. "Up to what?" Mira gripped my sleeve and got the words out fast, low, the way you say a thing you'd rather not. "The founding permit, the first act, the one signature every shackle in this empire hangs off. And it was never a dead king's hand, Voss. It's the one paper somebody living can still re-sign." My grin started somewhere and died on the way up. "If he gets that under fresh wax before you reach it," she said, "every cord you cut today knots itself back tight by morning, and mine's the first throat it finds." Karth's crowbar caught the next door before the 2 clerks behind it could drive the bolt home. Iron bit oak. The bolt housing tore out of the wood with a screech, the slab swung wide on a dark stairwell, and the waxjack's glow flickered somewhere far up the winding throat of the spire. Up. That's where Vel had gone, and that's where we went after him. The graycoats took the front. Hooks on their shoulders, bars swinging, the same iron that gutted the drowned ward at dawn, now hammering us a road up through the court's own spine. 200 pairs of boots came behind, breath roaring off wet stone, every tread drumming up through my heels. First landing. A pair of clerks had hauled a records cabinet across the arch, ledger spilling, inkpots bursting black across the floor. One had a stamp up, hand shaking. "Court ground," he tried. "You can't." Karth put his shoulder to the cabinet and walked it over them. Paper everywhere. The clerk went down under his own barricade, still holding the stamp as if it meant something, and we stepped across him and kept climbing. Vel's voice came down the well, unhurried, pleased with itself, the voice of a man who still thinks the paperwork is on his side. "You're slower than the worksmen, Inspector," he called down, almost kind. "Keep talking," I shouted up. "It's how I'll find you in the dark." Higher, the air dried out, went papery and old, the cold of a place where nothing had burned a candle in 100 years but the one Vel carried. A second knot of loyalists waited at a brass-bound door. 4 of them, backs to the wood, a wax jack between their feet and every stamp in the spire heaped on a stool. They weren't fighters. You could see it in the way they held the bars they'd grabbed. Wrong end, white knuckles, elbows in. "Last door, Inspector." The tallest lifted his chin, knuckles bone white on a bar he didn't know how to swing, and tried to make his voice carry. "He's sealing the founding act behind it. You're already too late." Karth didn't argue. He swung. The first bar took a clerk across the forearm, and the man folded with a yelp, and then the graycoats were in among them, hooks under the brass straps, hauling. The door fought. Screws tore out of the stone one by one, the brass band peeling like rind off a fruit, and the whole slab leaned, groaned, and came down flat into the room beyond in a boil of gray dust. There it was, the great register. A round hall opened under the spire's crown, shelves climbing into the dark on every wall, 10,000 acts stacked to the ceiling. Dead center, on a black iron stand, chained the way you chain a thing you're scared of, lay one cracked sheet of vellum, older than all of it. The founding permit. The first act, one signature, still wet enough to re-sign, and every collar and cord and shut door in this whole rotten empire hung off the bottom of it. Vel stood over it. Waxjack lit at his elbow, a fresh stick of crimson going soft in the flame, and he wasn't hurrying now. He had the stand between us and 100 feet of open floor I'd have to cross first. "You read everything, Inspector," he said, lifting the stamp out of the flame, the wax beading red at its lip. "Let's see you read this." He didn't bring it down on the founding sheet. He turned the stamp the other way. His thumb pinned a second paper flat against the iron, folded, court-creased, a hand I'd been wearing on my own forehead since dawn, and the brand at my hairline pulled tight and began to burn before the wax ever touched it. "You first," Vel said. The seal struck wax, and over our heads the spire's hour bell let go one flat iron note that shivered down through every shelf in the room. Vel leaned his whole weight onto the stamp. He ground the crimson into the folded paper pinned under his thumb, and the mark at my hairline answered with a coal's worth of heat pressed straight to bone. Then the date went live. I'd read 1,000 demolition orders. I knew the shape of one going to work, the chalk line snapped, the first beam drawn, the slow lean before the drop. I just never stood inside the building it was written against. The skin along my brow split. Not torn, ruled, scored. A straight, clean line, the way a foreman marks a facade before the hooks bite in. Warmth ran down my temple, and it wasn't sweat, and it didn't stop where sweat stops. 4 days, I told you. Vel lifted the stamp, squinted at the print, fed it back to the flame. I lied. The court reserves the right to advance the works. He read it off like a clause to a man who couldn't argue the wording. You're condemned property, Inspector. I'm only collecting on schedule. 100 feet of bare floor lay between me and the iron stand. The founding permit waited under its chains, that one signature still wet, and I put my boot forward across the gray stone. The boot landed. The leg under it didn't hold like a leg holds. It held like a prop with the wedge kicked loose, and I dropped to one knee with a groan coming up through my own ribs I'd only ever heard from a roof letting go. Inspector! Karth, somewhere at my back, a gray coat already shouldering toward me. Vel flicked 2 fingers. A clerk dragged the wrecked brass door half across the arch, and 100 turned enforcers jammed in the gap behind me, hooks tangling. 200 men, suddenly a yard too broad for the door their own bars had torn open. I got up, palm flat on the nearest shelf, 10,000 dead acts taking my weight, and I hauled myself 1 step nearer the stand. Vel didn't flinch at the distance. The distance was doing his work for him. "Feel that?" he said, soft waxjack hissing as he turned the stick in the flame. "Dead King never built you to carry this floor. You're a fault he forgot to mark, and I'm the inspection that found it." He brought the softened wax down toward the permit's lower margin, where the old name slept in the vellum. "Walk if you can. I only need you on the ground before your hand touches that chain." Something let go in my left shoulder, a pin, a rivet, whatever it is that holds a man squared at the corners, and the arm slid off the shelf and swung dead at my side. The dust shaking off me now was real dust, gray, gritty on my tongue, the inside of a wall. I took the step anyway, then I took a second, dragging the dead arm. On the third, the floor tipped. Not the floor, me, a load-bearing thing in my hip grinding down to powder, and I caught the edge of a reading lectern with my good hand and hung there, breathing grit, 60 feet of open stone still yawning between my fingers and that signature. "Karth!" I got out. "The stand! Pull the chain!" But the captain hit the half-shut door at a dead run and bounced, the brass slab screeching an inch and no more, 4 clerks throwing their backs against it from the room's far side. He couldn't reach me. None of them could. The gap held them like a clamp, and Vel didn't even look up to enjoy it. He lowered the wax toward the page. "Read fast, Inspector," he said, and for the first time, the kindness was gone out of it. "You're coming down faster than I planned." My knee went next, not buckled, crumbled, the bone in it turning to the chalk-soft stuff they grind out of a condemned cornice, and the leg folded under me wrong, sideways, and put me flat on the cold floor with my cheek in the grit and the iron stand swimming somewhere above. Too far, the change permit a pale smear at the top of a tower I no longer had the joints to climb. I got my good hand under me, pushed. The wrist gave a sound like a green stick snapping, and the wax kept dropping toward that wet old name, and I had nothing left standing to carry me the rest of the way. "Voss, your date!" The words climbed up through the floor, not down from the iron stand, up, through the cold stone under my cheek, up the spire's hollow stair from somewhere far below, worn thin to a wire, but hers. Mira, sealed in a cell at the tower's root, behind this hour wax I couldn't reach and couldn't void, and still she'd hauled one whole breath up the throat of the building to throw it at me. "Read your date! When did it file?" I got one eye off the grit. The permit swam pale and chained above me. Vel's wax stick hung a red inch over the old wet name, and the bead at its tip swelled and didn't fall. "A demolition order dates from the standing structure!" Her voice cracked and came again, each word dragged up 100 turns of stair. "You taught me that, the day the thing was raised. I read your brow, Voss. Works to commence upon a standing structure this reign. Standing. You have to have been raised here first." Vel's hand stopped. That was the tell. The wax jack tilting, the clerk at the brass door turning his head, and Vel himself looking down at me while the smooth went out of his face. "When did you stand up in this city?" Mira called. I pulled the thing up out of the dark I'd packed it in, a press under my own palm. Condemned in red, my hand on the lever, the floor of the old world going out from under me. Then warm stone, a dead man's mark cooling on my forehead, a city of incense and rot. "I died first," I said into the floor, loud enough to fall down the shaft to her. "I died over there before I ever stood up here." "Then the date lapsed the second you died." She was almost laughing, the kind with tears under it. "There was no structure when it filed. He's been pulling down a building that was never raised." "The mark is live." Vel's voice had lost its oiled edge. "It's on his skull. It's burning. I can see it work." "It expired before I got here." I turned my head, found him. "You read everything but the date line, clerk. Same as me, I never read my own. So I read it now." Not with my eyes, I couldn't see my own brow, but the way I'd read 10,000 facades, feeling for the one figure that doesn't hold. The date sat in the corner of the mark like a keystone with no wall under it, filed against a structure raised this reign, and the man it named had gone in the ground a world away before the ink was ever cut. expired. Not mine to carry, never Vel's to pull down. The heat at my hairline guttered, a coal lifted off the bone. I worked my right hand up off the stone. The snapped wrist screamed, and I told it to wait its turn. 2 fingers, then the thumb, dragging up my own cheek through grit, and the wet line scored down my temple, up to the mark itself. I set my thumb flat to my brow and pulled it sideways. The mark came away. Not torn, smeared, the way day-old ink lifts off a voided permit. A streak of dead red dragging across my fingertip and crumbling into nothing. Under it, the skin was just skin. The scored line at my hairline closed to a thin, pale seam, then to nothing at all. The dust stopped shaking off me. Then it came back, drawn up out of the air, packing into the hip ground to powder, the knee gone to chalk, the wrist. Bone setting under the skin with a sound like a wedge driven home. The dead arm woke in a riot of pins. My leg took the floor, and the floor held it. I got a knee under me, then a boot. Then I stood up in the great register on 2 legs that carried me, clean-browed, nothing left on my skin for any man alive to collect. Vel's mouth opened. Over his head the wax stick was already coming down, that red bead falling now, falling toward the Empire's first wet name on the chained page. And 60 feet of bare stone still lay between my clean hand and that chain. The seal came down on the founding name, and Vel leaned his whole weight behind it, both palms flat, grinding wax into the chained page like a man setting a cornerstone he meant to stand on forever. I crossed the floor, 60 feet of bare marble, and not one gray coat moved to stop me. They'd watched the mark lift off my skull, and now they only watched me come. Vel straightened off the page. "Sealed," he said, his chest worked. "Renewed. This reign, this hour." "You're late by a stamp, Inspector." I came up to the iron stand, and I didn't reach for his seal. I reached past it, to the first line at the head of the page, the founding grant in ink gone brown 2 centuries deep, the line the whole stack of the Empire hung from. "Read it with me," I said. He didn't want to. His eye went down anyway, the way a man's eye always finds the figure you point at. "Works to commence," I read, "upon a standing structure this reign." I tapped the brown line. "Same words you branded me with, same words you've pressed into 10,000 collars. Who raised the seat that sealed this one, Vel?" "The throne sealed it." The oil was gone from his voice now, scraped down to grit. "The throne the permit made." I moved my finger to the date. The permit a throne had to seal. No structure stood here when this filed. It raised the hand that signed it. I looked up at him. "A permit can't father its own clerk. It's been void from the first stroke, and you've been pulling a whole city down in the name of a building that was never legally raised." There was a stick of red lead in the tray by the inkwell, the soft kind, the kind we scored across a condemned door before the wreckers came up the street. I closed my hand on it. Vel's hand closed on my wrist, the healed one. He had 30 years and a head of weight on me, and he set them both against my arm, and my mended bones held the line and didn't give an inch. "You can't write on the register," he said, very low. "No man has ever." "I'm not writing." I twisted my wrist out of his grip. "I'm condemning." I dragged the red across the founding date. 1 line, corner to corner, the way I'd struck 1,000 rotten sills. The lead bit, broke, left a wax-bright streak of red lying across 200 years. The dome of wax he'd just ground into the name let go of the stone. Not melted, lifted, the whole seal sliding off the page in a curl of cold red, and under it, the Empire's first name lay bare and signifying nothing at all. Vel made a sound and pressed his palm down to hold it. It came away on his hand in flakes. At the brass door, the underclerk gave a small cry. The brand at his throat ran like a wet stamp pulled too soon and wiped itself to clean skin, and the man stood there touching his own neck with both hands, finding nothing. It went out across the room without a sound. No fire, no thunder, no shelf so much as trembling. Every live line on every page simply stopped being open. The green glowing dates, the burning grants, The this hour seals all going gray together in one breath, the whole vast file of the capital closing itself the way a clerk shuts a matter that's finally done. Vel turned the ring on his own finger. The face of it had gone smooth. No eagle, no device, just worn silver. He pressed it to the back of his hand to check it, the way you shake a stopped watch. Nothing took. He pressed again, harder, and ground bare metal into his own skin and raised it, and there was no mark. "Take him," he said. The word had nowhere to land. By the door, the 20 graycoats stood with their pikes grounded and their collars bare, and not one boot came forward, because the order that had owned them had just filed itself shut in his hand. "You can't," Vel said. "To me now." To the room. To the dead ring. There is a standing structure. There is an empire. You're holding a closed file. I set the red lead down on the change page, soft, the way you lay a tool down when the job's called for the day. "It's not burning, Vel. Look at it. Nobody's burning. It just lapsed, same as I did." He looked at me across the voided page, and the question that sat in his stripped face sat in every face turned up the long stair behind me. The great seat at the head of the room was empty now. The only stamp left working in the whole empire was the stub of red lead cooling under my hand, and not one living soul in that hall knew yet where I meant to bring it down. A gray coat leaned his pike against the marble and stepped clear of the line. Nobody had sent him. He looked at the empty seat, then down at the bare skin where his collar used to ride, and he walked out onto the open floor like a man testing river ice he didn't trust to hold. The others watched him do it. A second pike went down. The underclerk had stopped patting his own throat and stood gripping the brass rail, staring up the long stair where the doorway had filled with people, 100 faces, more behind, every neck bare, all of them waiting for some hand to come down and tell them what they were now. "Sit." It came from the stair, one voice. "Take it. Sit in the seat." The word ran backward through the press, and more mouths caught it. The chair at the head of the room, 2 centuries of weight in its arms, and nobody in it. Mira climbed up against the flow of them and put her hand flat on the page I'd just killed, the red line still wet bright under her fingers. "They'll put you up there," she said, quiet, only for me. "Right now. They want it filled before they have to think." "I know what they want." "It's yours for 8 feet of walking." I looked at the chair. The cushion had gone flat under dead men, and the arms were worn pale where a long line of hands had gripped them to feel like more than they were. I'd condemned buildings that smelled better. "No," I said. Vel laughed, one dry scrape with nothing behind it. "You tear the whole house down, and you won't take the one dry room in it. There's no running this from the floor, Inspector. Watch me run it from a desk." I turned my back on the throne and walked to the low table where the registrar worked. Vel's table, his inkwell, his blotter still damp. I dragged the stool out and sat. From down here, the great seat looked exactly like what it was, an empty chair somebody had bolted too high. "A clean book," I said. "Anybody. There has to be one that was never opened." Mira was already at the shelf. She came back with a ledger still stiff in its spine, the leather uncracked, and she set it in front of me and held it flat while I broke it open to the first white page. No founding line, no brown ink, nothing on it but the cold and the waiting. The red lead was worn to a stub the length of my thumb. A dozen lines left in it, maybe. I wasn't going to spend the first one on a date. "You," I said to the underclerk, "come here." He came like the floor might tip under each foot. He stood at the corner of the desk with both hands still hunting the throat that had nothing on it. "What's your name?" His mouth opened, closed. "Underclerk, third, that's a job." I asked your name. The silence on him stretched long enough that I understood nobody had asked in years. Then, rough, "Adrian." It was Adrian. It still is. I bent over the white page, laid the red down, and wrote it. Adrian. Then beside it, in the column where the Empire used to brand a man's price and his term, one word. Free. pressed hard, the lead biting and breaking the way it always did when the job was real. I lifted the stub. The first honest line in 200 years sat there drying, and not one shelf trembled, and the dome stayed up. Adrian stared at his own name like he could warm his hands on it. "Next," I said. A gray coat shouldered to the desk, then the man behind him. The line started forming itself before I'd asked for one, curling out the door and down the stair into a city that didn't know yet it had a registrar instead of a throne. Mira leaned down. "Him too?" Her chin went toward Vel, standing alone by the lifted seal with the flakes of it still on his palm. I thought about it longer than he'd earned. "Him too. Same line, same word. Just the name, no title on it." I looked up at the man who'd branded the founding words into my skull. "You get to be a person, Vel. That's the worst thing I can do to you." His jaw worked, and nothing came out. I turned back to the page. The stub was short, and the line was long, and somewhere out past the doors the bells nobody owned anymore had started ringing themselves stupid. I licked the lead, set it to the next clean row, and asked the woman in front of me her name.